An entrepreneur jumps into the water first and then decides, can I swim? Rather than am I sure I can swim and then, jump into the water. So I think the mindset is I will figure things out. And in large part, it's because they don't know what they don't know. And it doesn't put a fear on them.
Every once in a while, you come across someone whose journey refuses to fit into a single title: engineer, researcher, entrepreneur, professor, inventor. Our guest today has spent decades providing that some of the world's biggest innovations begin inside the universities, but create their greatest impact outside them. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of School to Startup brought to you by Tracxn, a private marketing intelligence platform that's been supporting the global university ecosystem for over 12 years. Through our university partnerships, we work with institutions driving innovations and entrepreneurship, and this series highlights the academic leaders making that happen. I'm Harish, your host today. It's my pleasure to welcome Professor Sridhar Taiyur, a distinguished research chair and university professor of operations management at Carnegie Mellon University's Tepper School of Business. Professor Taiyur, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation.
Great. Before we dive into entrepreneurship and startups, I have to say, when I was reading about your achievements, I realized that introducing you properly could easily take longer than this interview. So let me ask you something much simpler. How do you introduce yourself these days?
Yeah, good question. I think I don't know if I really introduce myself anymore. I suppose, in the keynotes I've given, somebody introduces me. Depending on whether they want to emphasize my extracurricular activities, like he's a film producer and he loves movies, or oh, he loves cars and he loves driving cars. So there is that part of the introduction. Or on the more serious side, if I'm speaking in a venue, then they introduce me as, hey, he's been a professor, but along the way he has been a software entrepreneur and a social entrepreneur, and now he's being a limited partner in a venture capital firm. So I think they introduced me the way you would think this would make sense here, is somebody who has tried to fuse academia and entrepreneurship in as seamless a way as possible over the last 30 or 35 years.
Right, and very interesting. One thing that really stood out, you never seem uh, content with publishing research papers alone. I think you kept asking, how do we make this useful? Why do you think so much brilliant universities or university research team never makes it into this real world?
So I think maybe it's worth thinking about what makes for great university research, just as its own thing, right? So what makes for a professor to become famous in academia, right? What should the professor have done that other professors say, this guy is smarter than me, right? I mean, right? And so the focus there is really to advance the frontier, right, of knowledge, right? And the audience is typically the other professors, right? So university research is communicating to other university professors, right? So the mental mindset of somebody who goes into a deep research program and wants to be known as a very good professor typically would have in their mindset advancing knowledge for its own sake being a foundational advance, a frontier advance, a methodological advance that is very broadly useful and has very long-term impact without being too specific about where exactly the impact is coming right now and how exactly will this impact get rolled out in practice. So I think the mindset, the focus, the way academia typically would think, I think is how I describe it, right? And so for you to get tenure in the United States, your letters come from other professors who are ahead of you, and they typically write about how clever your work is, how it has advanced the frontier of your field. So that's kind of the mindset from a university perspective, right? Right?
Interesting.
And students probably don't think that way. If you're an undergraduate student, you think about professors as teachers and you measure them as, hey, was he clear in the classroom? Was the syllabus consistent with what was taught? Were the exams, kind of in line with the course material? Is it too easy? Is the professor, approachable? Does he answer my question? So if you think about an undergraduate or MBA student, their view is the teaching and the teaching interaction of it. But if you think about a university research professor, that is not really, how their primary self-identification will be. You see, it's neither the teaching which students are typically used to, nor is it the industrial impact. That is how broad society would view it. Really, it is an internal society mechanism. Okay, that's on the academic side. Now, when you think about entrepreneurship and impact and practice, you have to be extremely clear on what the value you're adding in addition to what is being done in practice. Now, it is possible that what is being done in practice is actually not at the frontier of intellectual research. So many professors might not want to go there, not because they don't want to make impact, because in their mind, they're taking a step back from the intellectual frontier, right? That's one piece. The second piece is they themselves might not have that entrepreneurial DNA in them. That is, they like being quiet, they are introverted, they like to work in small groups, they want to think quietly without being disturbed. And so the personality of the person who decides to do fundamental research may be fundamentally inconsistent with giving a pitch to a venture capital fund or winning in an RFP process with fighting other people. So the personality itself may be different. So I think the two things I wanted to emphasize was what drives academic research is fundamentally different from what drives entrepreneurial scaling. And the personality of the individual who self-selects to be a professor is more likely to be in line with the first piece and not with the second piece. So hopefully that gives you a broad sense of why professors may not want to or may not be suitable really for entrepreneurial advances.
Interesting. And talking about entrepreneurship, you have worked with entrepreneurs for decades. So if you compare founders today with founders 20 years ago, what has changed the most and what has remained exactly the same?
I think more things have remained the same than that have changed. In particular, I think an entrepreneur jumps into the water first and then decides, can I swim? Rather than am I sure I can swim and then, jump into the water. So I think the mindset is I will figure things out. And in large part, it's because they don't know what they don't know. And it doesn't, put a fear on them. When I think about a typical, again, I'm going to be caricaturing an academic professor who is not an entrepreneur. I think they want to line up all the ducks and make sure everything is set up that, and then say, maybe I'll do something, that works. It's a very risk averse, in that sense, compared to, I think, what the entrepreneurs are. They probably don't know the risk they're taking and it doesn't bother them that they don't know what tomorrow is going to look like. So I think some of the personality and the drive that is required for somebody to enjoy entrepreneurship and take the beating as it comes along as part of the sport, right, I don't think has changed. I
Interesting.
think what has happened, I think, over the last 25, 30 years is way back, entrepreneurship was not necessarily the most important or most viable thing, especially for a good academic student. In fact, in the olden days, very olden days, to be an entrepreneur meant you were a rogue. That is, you somehow did not fit in the mainstream. You were not an IIT 10 pointer, because if you were an IIT 10 pointer, you were, a smart guy or smart girl, and you were kind of straight and narrow. I mean, you kind of followed the process, right? And an entrepreneur was somebody who's like, I don't like studying. I really not good at doing exams. I don't see the point of this, right? And so I think what I really see over the last 25, 30 years, which has helped, I think, academics, good academics, become successful entrepreneurs, is that it has become a knowledge-based economy. That is, today, you are a Stanford, MIT, IIT, if you're a UK, Cambridge student who would typically be considered a good student, right? And yet, you would be an entrepreneur. That is, you're not really a rogue, are you? Right? So I think what has happened is entrepreneurship has become much more mainstream. It has become much more respectable. In fact, it has become so respectable. From what I understand, people, very good students, are not going to standard jobs in consulting or Fortune 500 or getting PhDs, but they're actually going into entrepreneurship, not because they were C students, but because they were actually A plus students. So I think that has really changed over the last 25, 30 years, is the confluence between being what I call book smart and being street smart. I think has become much closer and not really a contradiction.
Very well said. Talking about students, you have taught and mentored thousands of students over the years. So when you meet students who later become, exceptional entrepreneurs, what qualities do you notice early?
I think they have a fairly specific use case in mind, right? So they know kind of what is the specific thing they want to do. So when somebody is still trashing around and they have an idea of being an entrepreneur versus specifically what they want to do, that to me is a bit of a red flag. You see? Because it sounds good. You're reading the newspapers, everybody is saying, oh man, this guy, boom, at 26 he became a billionaire. And you say, wait a minute, I'm 24 and I would like to be a billionaire. You don't know how, but you have the you have the idea of entrepreneurship versus actually having an entrepreneurial idea. So I would say I think that's one of the differences that I see in terms of those who kind of make it versus those who want to make it. Okay, it's the same thing in academia, by the way. There are PhD students who want to be professors, and then there are PhD students who then become professors, successful professors. And again, the difference is, in some sense, having a more specific path that in their mind they know this is what I want to do, versus there must be something, don't you think, I can do because I'm a fairly smart person, right? So I think when I see people who have a specific path that they have put, which may not be the path that will eventually succeed, but they have in their mind something concrete. I think that is what I makes a difference. Because then one can dig deeper into the concreteness and say, how big is the problem? Why can't somebody else solve this problem? Why is the problem not being solved? Who do you think will pay for it? From which budget is it coming? Who would you sell this to? Right? How would you show a proof of concept that it would work? What kind of team or money do you need to get started to show a minimum viable product. So we can start having a concrete conversation.
Right, very interesting. You mentioned about entrepreneurial idea. So every startup has that moment where an idea suddenly feels real, right? What was the moment for you with respect to startups?
Very good. So I did not think about entrepreneurship until obviously I had become, a tenured professor, right, and had been, teaching in executive education. I had done consulting with McKinsey and was part of the consultant to the firm of McKinsey. And I had done direct consulting at Fortune 500 companies like Caterpillar or IBM and projects, as well as smaller companies. Around. So first, I was not a 21-year-old undergrad jumping into entrepreneurship. I was already a 32-year-old man, right? So that's the first setup. Now, two things happened. One is the internet came along in '96, and the browsers, came along in '97, and so some of us who were used to doing programming in C and writing executable codes that get used and deciding, oh, is it a Dell laptop, is it a Sun laptop, is it a workstation, and all that. Notice that this was a beautiful interface that would remove that kind of creating all the different executable files and so on and so forth, right? And so I think the internet allowed us to think about two things. One is you don't have to write code for specific hardware compiling systems. And second, because of the connectivity, you didn't have to solve problems, fragmented. You could have a virtual, kind of a server integration doing it. So I think one piece was the technology shock that came was there, right? Now, because of my executive education, because of working with companies that were making investments in ERP systems and advanced planning and scheduling systems, whether they were from I2 or Managistics on the APS side, or SAP or Oracle on the ERP side, I noticed that they were still doing a lot of things that they were doing before using spreadsheets. That they were still so what I noticed was that the information technology investments they were making were actually not giving them what they wanted. They were giving them the data, they were giving them the way to mechanically execute a plan, but it wasn't coming up with what should be the safety stock, what should be the lot size, and how does the safety stock connect with the lot size in this location versus that location. So I felt that they were actually missing a third leg, which was really very, very serendipitous for me, because that was basically the research I was doing. I was doing the research on what should be the safety stock across a supply chain, so that if you keep more up, you can keep less down. Or you should keep more down, and therefore, since you're keeping more down, you might as well keep less up, right? And so that was completely missing. And I could see that after all the investments in ERP and APS, the companies were still struggling. So then I thought, if I can use the internet technology to really take my algorithms and make sure that it sits on top of the ERP instances and APS instances, then I could create this enterprise inventory optimization, an entirely new category, right? The EIO. So there was ERP, enterprise resource planning. There was advanced planning and scheduling, APS. So I created a whole third segment called EIO, so that I could communicate to them it is not ERP plus plus, it is not APS plus plus, it is an entirely third leg. And so SmartOps really created the market for enterprise inventory optimization, and to sit on top of the ERP, to grab the data, do my math, and put the information into APS. So I benefited from the fact that ERP and APS were there, and I benefited from the fact that they were not doing what companies wanted. And then the shock of the internet came in, and I thought, okay, if I don't take advantage of this, God will slap me when I go to heaven or not, and say, dude, I gave you the most beautiful opportunity. I dropped it on your lap. Okay. Do it. So, yeah.
Amazing. Amazing. Zooming back to your career at CMU, you have spent years of your career at Carnegie Mellon. So today, CMU is widely recognized as one of the world's leading innovation ecosystem. So, what makes that environment so unique, and what can universities around the world learn from the Carnegie Mellon approach?
So I think Carnegie Mellon for I think we celebrated our 100th anniversary or 125th anniversary. I don't remember the exact number recently. So I've been around, right? And it was always a technical university. I mean, it was Carnegie Institute of Technology, and then merged with Mellon College of Science, and then Margaret Morrison School of Women, and it became Carnegie Mellon University. So I think we were not a liberal arts college, potentially what an Ivy League might have been to begin with, right? We didn't start with Romance languages or history or divinity school. Right, poetry. And that wasn't kind of the heritage. It was engineering, right? I mean, steel making and railroads and things of that type. So I think the engineering, technical, kind of upbringing or founding, I think has been helpful because of the world kind of we live in, right? And so we were one of the early schools to take computer science seriously. Right, buying one of the first machines, hiring faculty members or moving faculty members from existing departments to say, hey, this computer thingy is not a bubble, it's not a one-off thing. I think we need to understand. So I think many of the early Turing prizes went to Carnegie Mellon professors who were laying the foundations of computer science. I think the first Turing prize probably went to a Carnegie Mellon professor, right? So in that sense, the computer science, whether it's MIT because of Minsky and AI, of course, Herb Simon and Alan Newell and many other folks here, and of course Stanford, and then you see Berkeley, and I think Cornell caught up pretty quickly. And so I think Carnegie Mellon has been kind of the founder of this, from the 1960s, 70s in computer science, right? And so you have the engineering type technical background, we have a computer science background, and we're a very small school. I mean, I don't know how much you know about us. We're not like Ohio State or we're nothing like that. We are much smaller than even MIT and Stanford. Maybe we are like Caltech, right, of that size. So when you're that small, you have to kind of and you're fighting with people who are much bigger and much better endowed. You have to be I guess entrepreneurial because that's how you kind of survive and retain number one. So for I've been here 35 years. So for me to collaborate with somebody in electrical engineering or ECE department, or collaborate with somebody in the Heinz School of Public Policy, right, or write a paper with the computer science department, it's very easy. It's very seamless. I almost don't even think of them as being in a different department. Not only are we close, if I send an email and say let's meet for coffee, we can just go meet for coffee. So I think being small, being forced to fight against established larger places, things have kept the school kind of nimble, right? In terms of how do you compete, right, against the big folks if you are not kind of mingling. And so I think that kind of transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary thing, I think, has been there, and it's in the DNA. Now, the last few decades, because entrepreneurship has taken front and center, we have the Schwartz Entrepreneurship Center at CMU. Is housed at Tepper, but it is actually a central hub for all other parts of the school. So, of course, like any other such centers, we run competitions for students. There are awards. They're judged by venture capital, actual venture capital people, right? There's mentoring that can be done. We have space, right, for people to be there for 3 months. right? And so I think the last 10 or 15 years, instead of it being ad hoc, where computer science had its own entrepreneurial network and business school had its own entrepreneurial network, and obviously somebody in electronics and magnetic thing would have their own thing. I think an attempt has been made to say, hey, can we put one umbrella around it? So I think, like many other schools, we have also tried to have enough centralization to take advantage, but not make it so centralized, because when you become very bureaucratic and things of that type, you kill the very baby that you're trying to do. So I think the challenge is how to bring various fragmented things together, but not be such heavy that you kind of kill it with with bureaucracy.
Very true. Before we wrap up, I'd like to look ahead. Many people believe we are entering what is being called as the second quantum revolution, with advances in quantum computing, quantum sensing, and quantum communication. So, for students and entrepreneurs beginning their journey today, what should they be paying attention to over next decade? And how do you see these technologies, shaping innovation and entrepreneurship in the future?
Yeah, so this is the next frontier, right? I mean, if you think about AI, I might say AI is already in the rear view mirror. I'm not saying that there's not more to be done, or people are still trying to figure out what to do with this generative AI. And I have a PhD student who is using generative AI to do healthcare. So I don't want to say it is like steam locomotives and it should be in a history museum. But if you think about the predictive analytics, the typical ML stuff, CNN, DNN, I mean, that's like the 80s, 90s, and through the 2000, right? I mean, it's been cleaned up. So for you to come up and do, I want to do one more ML AI, people will groan, right? Because it's really not the frontier of things, right? So I think the question then is, if second quantum revolution is the frontier, how close is it, right? And which is closer than others. So I think quantum computing has the promise, but it is still probably not ready right now. So if you're an entrepreneur and you're saying, I want to hit the ground running and I want to start making impact right now, quantum computing is probably not going to do it, because IBM still, if you look at their roadmap, they're saying 2029 will have this, 2033 will have this, right? And so I started looking at quantum inspired computing, which said it's not quantum, but it has ideas from quantum, but still can be run on current hardware. And so there's a startup called Quantfluence in Bangalore, with whom I've been in touch with. One of the co-founders is a co-author with me. He's a professor from IIT Madras. And so it's like a step towards quantum, and maybe a quantum-inspired middle step could be helpful, right? So that's one path. I think quantum sensing doesn't get as much press. I believe it may be closer to go from lab to field. So, because there are use cases, for example, methane leak in gas lines, it's a real problem, both in terms of environmental, safety, as well as just money being lost, right? I mean, you're just losing gas in the air. And there are classical sensors trying to do it, but they have their limitations. But quantum sensor layer, in this kind of a hierarchical hybrid way, could move it to the next level. So going back to specific use cases, I think quantum sensing, non-military use cases could be quite close. So again, I think if you are a student trying to take classes, I think it's helpful to become familiar with some of the foundations of quantum, because I think it's coming in one form or the other. I think many schools are presenting those courses. I know computer science at CMU has an undergraduate senior elective and master's elective on quantum and quantum information science. I co-teach a class with ECE professor. I teach quantum integer programming optimization, and he teaches quantum machine learning and we kind of tag team on that, and very popular class. Lots of people. We have to change the room because the room is not big enough to do it. So I think getting what students learn in terms of ML, I think you want to start learning on quantum. So if you're a student, you want to become familiar with it, whether or not you immediately plan to work on it or not. In terms of financing, I think many quantum startups have gone public, so they're well financed. The governments are, I think, China and in Europe, UK, and then in the US, I think the new executive order is, suggesting that the government is willing to put money. In fact, maybe taking positions in some of these quantum startups. So I think people are willing to bet, but in reality, if you want to do something right away, it's probably not there, right? So it may be 2-3 years to get something in quantum sensing, maybe a bit longer in quantum computing, but quantum inspired computing is right here. Quantum communication is interesting because on the one hand, the use case is very clear. I mean, security, especially quantum digital payments, quantum money, I mean, would be perfect. But the technological issue is, you're sending this qubits on a fiber optic cable, it dies. What do we do in classical computing? We kind of, boost it. Right. So it's a repeater, it's a booster, right? So a quantum repeater is needed, and we are not close enough to finding a practical quantum repeater. And therefore, I think quantum communication, on the one hand, has incredible value, but on the other hand, probably is facing the largest, engineering challenge. So I think it's a very exciting time if you're a young person and you take a slightly longer view of how you want to contribute to society in this century, the second quantum revolution can be for you. But if you say, no, I want to hit the ground running and I want to be a billionaire tomorrow, I don't know if that's the right the right one.
Very interesting. This was just a fascinating conversation. From engineering and academic research to building successful companies, and learn why the future belongs to those who can turn ideas into real world impact. Thank you very much, Professor Taiyur. Thank you for taking your time to share your experiences, insights, and wisdom with us. It has truly been a pleasure having you on School to Startup.
No, thank you for inviting. I'm glad we could have this conversation, and I look forward to seeing this finished piece, but also seeing other interviews that you're doing with other professors.
Definitely. And to everyone watching, we hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as we did and found it both insightful and inspiring. If you did, don't forget to like this video, share your biggest takeaway in the comments below, subscribe to our channel, and click the bell icon so you never miss an episode of School to Startup. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.